we make do. Alrighty. So thank you everyone for coming out tonight. I know we're still filing in, but I'll just get started with my few housekeeping details. I'm Gracie, I'm the events coordinator for print. Those housekeeping details before we get started. If you have any questions during the talk, please feel free to enter them in the chat box, which is on the bottom right of your screen, or in the question and answer function, which is on the bottom bar of the screen. If you'd like a copy or Fire in the Blood, I will include the link to the print page, so you can just click right on through straight from the event. And now for our speakers. Matt Gallagher is a Wake Forest graduate and U.S. Army veteran. He's the author of the novel Youngblood and the memoir Kaboom, Embracing the Suck in a Savage Little War. He holds an MFA in fiction from Columbia and lives with his wife and son in Brooklyn. Perry O'Brien served in Afghanistan with the 82nd Airborne, but obtained an honorable discharge as a conscientious objector. His fiction has been featured in the war anthology Fire and Forget, and his nonfiction has been published by the New York Times and San Francisco Chronicle. So please join me in virtually welcoming Matt Gallagher and Perry O'Brien.
Hello, everyone. I'm Matt Gallagher. We're here to celebrate and talk about Perry's excellent new novel, Fire in the Blood. Perry, my friend, congratulations.
Hello, thank you so much, Matt. And thanks so much, Gracie and Brent, for hosting this.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I thought we'd dive right in. Print is a magnificent Maine bookstore, and you're a local Maine boy. So for any viewers maybe unfamiliar with your story and journey, could you just tell us a bit about yourself and what took you from Maine to enlisting in the U.S. Army and now becoming a novelist?
Yeah, great question. And I'm very happy to be finally back in the great state of Maine after being all over the place for way too long. But I'm originally from Peaks Island off the coast of Portland. And, in terms of joining the Army, I grew up in there may be some folks watching who know my folks. And I grew up in a very liberal, progressive family to the point where when I did finally, when I did make the decision to enlist, my parents loved to joke that some of their friends were like, he's joining the Army? And then after a pause, whose Army? But I was like a 19-year-old kind of, little bit of a recovering teenage miscreant, and wanted something. I had spent 2 years, after homeschooling through high school, I spent 2 years at the University of Southern Maine, which was amazing, doing philosophy, and just had this craving to be part of something larger, something scarier. And I ended up enlisting just 2 weeks before September 11th. So everything was much more exciting and much scarier and much larger, on a historical scale, and certainly I was prepared for. But that was how I initially ended up in the military.
2 weeks before. Yeah, that's excellent timing.
I forget, were you already in, or were you?
I kind of similar timeline. I had just started ROTC in college, so I was a freshman in college, and I think signed my papers about the week before or something.
Oh, so similar thing of just like, here we go.
Yeah. It seems super quaint to say all these years later, but at that age, in that moment, it felt like it was all meant to be in some grand, stupid, important way.
Totally.
With all the narcissism of youth, like we were at that age. So Fire in the Blood, it is many things. I think the way I think of it is, it's part war story, it's part murder mystery. There's much of it happens in New York City, but it's very much a global story at the same time. Looking back on it all these years later, what would you say the initial seed for what became Fire in the Blood was? What was the genesis for this story and this vision?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the very first, I don't want to say that I've been working on this book for 17 years or something. That would be somewhat of an exaggeration, but that is about when some of the first, ideas started to pop into my head. It would be many years until I would actually sit down and put, pen to paper, but it was in Afghanistan. I was deployed there a couple years after I enlisted in 2003. I was with the 82nd Airborne as a medic, and one of the many incredibly strange and cruel, surreal dynamics of war was us as a clinic, like receiving and processing these emergency Red Cross messages for, folks who had a tragedy back home. Loved one died usually. And then, they got 2 weeks of emergency leave and, had to go back home to, just like taking a break from the war, which of course, generationally is something you see so much, even, Vietnam literature and experiences, you know what I mean? Certainly the world wars, right? People went to the front and then came back, and there's this back and forth movement, but obviously, our generation, like, you're deployed, you're there, right? Unless you get injured, that, you're going to be there for the duration. So, knowing folks who had these personal tragedies and then just had this strange, like, break from the war where they were expected to go home, reconcile their affairs, and somehow, grieve and then just like jump back into the saddle, to me was just both really strange and it also, but I think, as a lifelong reader of, crime and detective fiction, one part of, there's this deep resonance of like humanity of this, this like separating yourself from the war to be with your family that I think we can understand. And there's so much potential there emotionally, but then also from just like a plotting perspective, I couldn't help but think, what if, someone, you lost someone under questionable circumstances, and you only had that compressed 2-week period to try to figure out what had happened, and that sort of combination got the thing rolling.
Yeah, no, I remember when you first told us about this. For those of you that don't know, Perry and I first became friends at a veterans writing workshop hosted by New York University about 8-9 years ago now, which is a sign that we're getting old. But when you brought up this idea, I remember just being struck by the brilliance of the container, right? Because it, like you just said, like it forces this compressed timeline, but you can draw from so much anytime you need to get out of that space. And one of the things when I reread the finished novel here is kind of one of the themes that you really tap into. Despite the fast timeline, despite this really fascinating story, is kind of the lingering corrosive effect of foreign war and how it infiltrates here back home. Which is certainly topical to many things happening here in the States right now in 2020. And of course, we see that in the main character of Coop, the protagonist, who's coming home to figure out how and why his young bride has been killed. But not just him. I was thinking of how it shines through in Costa's character as well, the main antagonist, who is a veteran of foreign conflict in his own right. So I was wondering if maybe you could tell us a bit about Costa, but also how these two polarizing characters who were literally and figuratively pitted against each other have both been shaped by war and compromised by it in different ways.
Yeah, wow, that's such a great question and such a good read.
It's easy for me to ask. You have the hard part.
Well, I mean, a lot of your work, deals with similar themes. I really like what you said, the corrosive effects. Yeah, I mean, I think something that you write the work and then go back and see obviously all the ways that it reflects your own perceptions, and obviously as someone who had left the military as a conscientious objector, like I couldn't help but find myself writing characters and, scenes and settings where I sort of realized looking back on it that I was really, I kept being drawn back to places that are, you know, war damaged, but not in the most obvious ways, you know, even, you know, setting so much of it in terms of New York. I mean, it's most of the novel takes place in New York, but really it's the vast majority of it is specifically in the Bronx, where I was working as a union organizer for a while. But, you know, I think that the reason that resonated with me, that sort of setting, is because there just felt like this weird ghostly echo of, you know, the Bronx being some of the poorest, you know, one of the poorest parts of the country, like, and then Afghanistan, you know, one of the poorest countries in the world, and this sort of same echo of deprivation and of neglect and of exploitation, of sort of larger and frankly more sinister capitalist powers, you know, being at the intersections of struggles over turf and real estate and land, and, you know, and then by the same token, you know, thinking about Coop being, you know, a soldier of the modern war on terror, but of course the roots of that going way back, and thinking about all the other, you know, partisans and people we don't necessarily think of as veterans, but who have certainly carried arms in, you know, the struggles that have defined, you know, our current geopolitics. Yeah, and I just kept finding that the scenes I wanted to write, the spaces I wanted to write about, the people I wanted to write about, had all suffered collateral damage from, you know, from war, even if that damage was very, or that effect was very oblique, or, you know, very sort of second or third effect. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's interesting. When I first read a draft of this a few years ago, you know, like you know, us all being, you know, young veterans and Americans, you know, you readily identify with Coop, right? You know, parts of us are still identify as soldiers. Whereas it, you know, whether this, I'm sure it was intentional, you know, as a craftsman, it was intentional on your part. You know, even though he is the villain, parts of me now, having been out 10 years, I kind of understood Costa maybe more than I did. You know, he's a survivor, right? He took certain lessons from the NATO occupation of the Balkans in the mid-90s, and he's applied specifically Albania, and he's applied specific lessons from that to try to make a new life. Applying them in some ways I would not approve of from an ethical standpoint, nor I think would you. But I found that really interesting, and you know, I think there's for new readers coming to this for the first time, maybe space to wonder if Coop. There are some similarities between Coop and Costa, for all their differences, and they're maybe just at different phases of the journey. And though Coop makes different choices than Costa, than I think a younger version of Costa did. I don't know. Those are obviously my own writerly thoughts as I was rereading your novel.
No, that's great, and it's fine. I mean, it's something I've been thinking a lot about. Again, where I think for our country, you know, we're in this strange space in our relationship to traditional narrative, where in so many of the things that we watch and read, I mean, particularly watch, like with prestige television, you know, and the establishment of, like, not just the anti-hero, but kind of like the necessary antagonistic, necessarily, you know, evil or monstrous, you know, antagonist as protagonist, you know, has become so established, whether it's, you know, Tony Soprano or Walter White. And I, you know, I think there is a whole really disturbing way in which support for, like, Donald Trump came from this kind of glorification of, like, the necessary bad guy. You know, I think there's a lot of people that bought into that he was like the bad guy that we needed. But I think in this moment, it, again, as someone who loves, like, tradition, detective and crime fiction, and also Western fiction, where it's like at a certain point you're just kind of deciding whose perspective, like who among the killers and bad people, and folks who do really terrible things, whose perspective you're going to take, and whose set of accumulated experiences are going to kind of put together some kind of tapestry of meaning. But it's, Costa's unquestionably the antagonist, but both he and Coop have done really terrible things. And, and maybe, Coop may, live with this sort of almost like religious shame about that. And maybe that makes him the protagonist. But certainly, at a certain point from a craft level, you do realize you're just sort of, you're picking sides, or at least picking perspectives, and that doesn't always come along with a strong moral sense of like, white hat versus black hat.
Right. And that, that's true, not just true to life, it's good storytelling, right? And that there are degrees on this, but that doesn't mean that the white hat, in this case, Coop, doesn't make some really ethically compromised choices along the way, whatever his justifications for that.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Add one more thing to that. I mean, I think being told that to be the good guy, you have to do terrible things, and then reconciling the shame of that, and or even to just participate in terror or in terrible things. I mean, to me, is just so characteristic of, I think, many generations of veterans, but maybe particularly ours in an all-volunteer military, where, none of us were drafted, none of us had to be in uniform, right? I mean, obviously people were, there's all kinds of ways people are more or less forced into uniform, right? But broadly speaking, right, like in an all-volunteer, there's like a moral reckoning that has to happen. And I think a lot of us had the, oh wait, are we the stormtroopers moment, and then I guess one of the things that I was interested in is how, not just that moment of like, oh God, what if I'm one of the bad guys, but how that can like add rocket fuel to the pursuit of redemption in a way that only leads to greater, moral hazard or even atrocity, or which to me, and again, this is the kind of thing you look back on it after you write it, but I mean, obviously now looking back on the story, so much of it is about my own sense of like what happened with September 11th, you know what I mean? And the escalation of the wars that we are fighting to this day that have only, expanded across the globe. It's like you keep chasing redemption, through violence, and being surprised when that doesn't, give you, when suddenly there's no magic moment of being the good guy,
Right. Yeah. And you get further and further lost, but completely unable to turn back. And I think, not to make it too much of a macro upon the micro, but, I think much of that probably transfers over to Coop's journey during his 2-week search for purpose and meaning.
Yeah, it's one of the forces. I mean, it's also, it would be inaccurate to say that Coop's, like, that this 2 weeks is just like a straight downward spiral into great, you know what I mean? Like there is a sort of like back and forth of redemption, and I think I've been very interested to see how different people respond to, the arc of those 2 weeks for him, and the ending in particular. But yeah, I guess.
Well, I do. I have a question about the ending that I want to get to in a second, because I think it's pitch perfect, and I promise not to give too much detail away. But I also wanted to talk real quickly about the character of Kay. We've talked about some of the manly man characters, but this is a book with a strong, dynamic, vibrant women characters as well. One of whom being Kay, Coop's bride, who was killed in the opening pages. But she's a vibrant presence kind of throughout the book, despite that. So I was really curious, as a fellow writer, A, how you pulled that off, and then B, why you felt that was important. That she kind of haunts the rest of the story. After page 10, I believe. What went into the creation and development of K.
Yeah, thanks so much for asking that question. And I'm really glad that Kay did, that there is a vibrance there that because it's I'll say in subsequent revisions upon revisions, there was certainly a moment where I was like, oh damn it, I'm doing the dead girlfriend in the refrigerator. Is that the expression?
Right.
Having the plot revolve around a dead woman or a dead girl, so yeah, it felt very important to me that that Kate be as much of a living, breathing presence and character as she could be, without being alive and without without constantly resorting to flashback.
Right.
I also what I really didn't want her to be was like the ex-girlfriend or wife in the in all the like John Wick or whatever movies. Like I feel like it's like the same gauzy shot under sheets, of just like the perfect, who was like cruelly snatched away by fate or by bad guys or whatever happens, so I also, when we saw glimpses of Kay, I didn't want it to be this, even though maybe there's some way we romanticize, the people we've lost. I don't think anyone has memories that are sort of, golden hued in that way.
Right.
And honestly, I feel like I owe a lot to like women who read the book and helped make Kay more than, and particularly, my partner Hannah. Like it helped so much to have, women readers and, who could say, okay, this reads is a little bit much, a little bit like the classic girlfriend ghost, or the kind of like nondescript, I will avenge you or whatever.
Right.
So yeah, I feel very indebted to the folks who helped bring Kay to life.
Beta readers like that are so vital. They save us from ourselves. One of my favorite, there's multiple excellent scenes in this book, but I wanted to call attention to two of my own favorite, because that's one of the benefits I have as the questionnaire. So without giving too much away, Costa and Coop have met, and Coop has kind of been taken temporarily hostage, and Costa picks up his wallet and finds his U.S. Army ID card in there, and he's thinking to himself, and I'll read real briefly from this section. Killing him was out of the question, of course. You never killed soldiers, not if you could avoid it. A lesson ground into Costa's head during the days following the uprising, when their country was swarming with NATO troops. Armies are just another clan without Bessa, Luzum had told him, like the police or the mixed gangs. When people join for the advantages, there's only one way to build loyalty. You have to protect your troops while they're alive and avenge them if you die. So if you kill a soldier, there's never bargaining. They'll have to hunt you down, or their own men will lose faith. There's just so many deep layered truths to that, particularly kind of the pack mentality. And I think it's a really good example of what we were talking about earlier in terms of using these two very different men with very different world experiences and worldviews, still living and breathing their armed conflict here in the States, here in the Bronx. What went into that scene, that idea, that realization that being a U.S. Army soldier is actually going to save Coop in this situation?
Yeah. Wow. Thanks for bringing up that passage, because it does. Yeah. There's a lot to think about in this current moment. I mean, from police violence to, I mean, so the first thing, like, I always, part of what I think has really fascinated me about writing this, and the idea was just the weird mix of like oppressed privilege that you have as a veteran, right? Like, there's so many ways that assumptions are made about you, certainly not to your advantage, but on the other hand, you know, the pedestal experience, which of course was so heightened in those early years, you know, the thank you for your service. I mean, the yellow ribbons, like, I forget about sometimes. It's just like how fervent it was, you know, how aggressively strangers would come up to you. And I think some of that has died down, and people have, you know, kind of gotten the message about thank you for your service not always being appreciated, but maybe not even, you know. So, you know, yeah, so I think there's like, yeah, the idea that in some ways, like, you're just a grunt, but on the other hand, that, you know, a criminal would know that, like, it's a really bad idea to, you know, and like to in the same way that, like, there are repercussions that we famously know from cinema that criminals know not to kill a cop, you know. Similarly, you know, that's true for troops, and, you know, that I think a lot of us in the military have experienced that kind of like revenge motivator, certainly, right? And cycles upon cycles of it. And I, you know, so that was one part of it that I think really, you know, inspired that, but also that there are so many of the like ideals, the like deeply moving, you know, camaraderie based ideals that we talk about, like, you know, I think part of being in the military is that, you know, spending more than a year is realizing that so many of those things have an uncomfortable double motive, you know, like, never leave a man behind feels like this heroic moral commitment, you know, and is, again, the basis for so many stories and movies, and including some truly real life inspirational acts of incredible heroism. But on the other hand, is a pretty shrewd move if you're in an organization that requires people to take life and death risks every single day, right? Like, it's kind of the smart move. It's not, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
You need to have a leave no one behind ethos so that people will take the risks you need to accomplish your objective. Like, it's actually a pretty cynical, you know what I mean? Like, policy. And so I think part of the fun of writing Costa was someone who had experienced war, but without any of the romantic, you know what I mean? None of the chivalry, you know, no illusions of that, you know. He sees it in this sort of purely instrumentalist way. That there's something about that was like deeply satisfying, because all of us, I think, have intimations of that other side of the way of like military culture, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. For some reason, I'm thinking of like Bo Bergdahl and that situation, and how quickly, you know, people that we both served with were more than ready to throw him to the wolves, right? And suddenly, no man left behind came with a political asterisk, right? Because they disagreed with President Obama's decision, or you know, the details that came out, you know, and the fact that men got killed in the operations after looking for him, right? And you know, the kind of the hollow slogan suddenly got compromised by messy reality, and I think that's one of the reasons I love that pressure point of a scene. There's a lot going on there. One of my other favorites comes near at the very end, and I'll be vague because I don't want to give too much away. But it takes place. Coop has been physically wounded and probably needs immediate medical attention. But through the pomp and ceremony of post 9/11 America that you just mentioned, he gets swooped up in a parade of anti-war veterans marching, and there's so much symbolism that can be read into it. But what you so smartly do as a writer is you just write the scene, right? You don't call attention to kind of all the historical bells and whistles that you could. You just write the scene straight. Real briefly, this is a part that I wanted to share. There was no New York, just the protests. And as they pushed forward, Coop gave himself to the lift and swell. For a moment, everyone waited, a stillness of quiet bobbing. Then came a chant, a seagull's shriek of rage, and seemingly from nowhere, Coop was lifted and tossed forward, high among the shouts and picket signs, and all around people marching and screaming and banging on their instruments. Crowds of onlookers stood on either side of the bridge. Some were crying, others saluted. As the group of veterans neared them, those spectators broke into applause, their hands coming together, matching the beat of helicopters against the sky. A chill passed through Coop's back, up his leg, and into his damaged lungs, across every beating inch of his body. They're clapping for me, he thought. Tears ran down his nose and fell from his trembling jaw. The wind came over the water and iced the streams on his face. He felt a great heat at his back. Coop closed his eyes and saw glowing coals, red rocks, the sun flashing on sand. The parade staggered over the bridge, a grim jangle, and Coop smiled as he felt himself come apart. Man, that's beautiful. I mean, I've read a lot of post 9/11 war literature and homefront literature. That might be the best passage that captures the weird dichotomy, the clash of yellow ribbon patriotism and the realities of combat. There's so much going on there in just about a page and a half. Tell me you worked on that for years, because it's gorgeous.
Yeah, I wish I could say that it came out, I did indeed, and I thanks so much. That means a lot coming from you, a writer that I very much admire, I reworked that again and again until it felt right, and it, in terms of just sort of writing that. I spent so much time after I got out in those protests, and, just such strange events, again, like so unique to our generation, that, the Bush era anti-war movement, was so eager, I think, understandably to dispel the partial myth of like mistreatment of Vietnam vets by anti-war protesters, right? There's like this whole bizarre thing of like the spitting thing that, in fact, there's no documented case of, but, thousands of vets will say that they were spit on by hippies when they got home from, when they disembarked their plane back from Vietnam. But that aside, the way that these incredibly angry anti-war protests also uplifted warriors and tried to balance that, and what that was like, and for me, those protests kind of achieved more of that kind of dissolution of the self into a larger collective than I ever felt in the military, which is obviously but of course, like, I don't know that I would have experienced it that way if not for the military. So yeah, thanks so much for saying it. I'm glad that comes together, and because it felt important to me to get that scene out there, but it's a weird one to write.
No, you nailed it, man. It lands so well. It's an excellent conclusion for the book. There's a bit of a coda afterwards that finishes the resolution. I just have two more brief questions for you, and then we got some audience questions. I know the late E.L. Doctoro was one of your teachers and an important mentor to you during your MFA time and in graduate school. Do you just want to talk a bit about him and your relationship to him and what you learned from him as a man and an instructor?
Yeah, man. Wow. So, I mean, I feel so lucky to have, to have had any time with him. I mean, he was, while he was alive, he was the writer, the living writer who I just respected, admired, the most, and continues to hold that position, after his passing. Just I mean, I don't know that there's any other. There, like, for me anyway, there's no other author where I like have saved books. Like I have like tried to space out his work throughout my life, and there are like still 3 or 4 I'm just like holding off because I know that it's going to be such a transformative experience that like I need to do it justice. And like I've had the Waterworks just like sitting on my shelf, and every once in a while I'm like, am I ready yet? And I'm like, I don't know.
Right.
Sure. But I mean, I just he's such a writer's writer and an incredible like craftsman, and he just so deftly moved between all these genre elements, pieces, whether it's the mob or the Wild West, or war, or the
Civil War.
You know what I mean? Like, I mean, the March is one of my favorites of all time. And, the way that he blended that with just amazing poetry and then surreal disruptions, but then really exciting and plots that moved but always felt real in the way fiction and life should feel, never like overplotted, and then just again, not in a way that like I, after meeting him, really began to believe just wasn't so much the work of someone trying to like get a political message in there, but was just a genuine reflection of his attitude. Just every single one of his works saturated throughout with working class struggles of women, of people of color, of queer communities, like and of the left. I mean, he was a writer of the left in a way that but I don't think anybody could lift up a single page he wrote as agitprop or anything. And in fact, he in his classes would specifically say writers should not seek to write political work or whatnot. So I mean, I think there was so much that I learned by example just from studying his work, and then having the opportunity to study with him, and for getting his read of Fire in the Blood. It was just like incredible. And because he'd been teaching for so long, he's been working, he'd been working his whole career, in addition to writing, and he had just had such a refined sense of the craft. I can't say enough.
Yeah, no, he was an all-timer. One of my favorite lines from him is, the historian will tell you what happened, the novelist will tell you what it felt like. And I think Fire in the Blood more than lives up to that. So you did the old guy proud, Perry.
Man, I hope so. Yeah.
Last thing from me, can you tell us a bit about the organization you work for and organize for, Common Defense?
Yeah, happily. So in 2016, myself and some other veterans who were deeply concerned by this disgusting, crazy person named Donald Trump running for office during the Republican primary, were just outraged and frustrated by how he was using veterans as props for this, despicable campaign of xenophobia and racism, in a way that just really didn't reflect even what I think many of us felt like were pretty mainstream military values. And so, we got together and started organizing, and that became an organization. And we are now somehow 4 years later, the largest grassroots, progressive veterans organization in the country. And there are just folks all over right now, Common Defense members, doing incredible work on the ground, doing everything from like writing letters to the editor, to showing up outside of debates in North Carolina, to remind people of all the ways that Tillis, Senator Tom Tillis has just been a Trump enabler. So yeah, it's a great organization. I feel really humbled by the amazing team of all vets that I work with. You know, it's a totally vet-led organization, and you know, really we're going all out to kind of hopefully achieve our core mission of defeating Trump, even if it took 4 years.
Right on, right on. Thanks for fighting the good fight, man.
Thanks.
Appreciate that.
That's
All right. Let's see. First question is from Bob Keene. He asks, without giving too much away, did you ever consider a different ending for Coop, or was the ending you chose kind of inevitable, or from the get-go?
That's a great question, and hi, Bob. Yeah, I did. I spent a lot of time. You know, there are many different endings that were written, and so certainly, you know, none of the end was sort of written into it. I wrote most of the book pretty chronologically, which is, you know, because I think maybe just because I was working on it always as kind of a side hustle, you know, and just trying to snatch away a few precious hours when I could to work on it. It just was easiest to work on from beginning to end. So by the time I got to the end, I also didn't know what was going to happen, and it took, you know, as I know you're familiar with, Matt, many rewrites to arrive on that one. But yeah, it felt right when it came to me.
Yeah, no, I know how that is. It's frustrating that you didn't instantly think of it, but it feels when you know it when you come across it.
Right. Yeah.
Next question. Who are you reading now? Who do you read for inspiration? And what's your favorite underappreciated book?
Oh my God, those are all really good, hard questions. So, man, what have I been reading? I honestly have not been reading anywhere near enough fiction. I'm trying to get back to it. I have been, yeah, it's such a crazy time. It's been hard to like settle in and just appreciate a good book, honestly. And what I feel like I'm really terrible at remembering I'm sure 5 minutes from now or after this, I'm going to come up with a really long list of great underappreciated. I mean, the book that I keep going back to again and again, I would say, and maybe I'm just going to say it's underappreciated because I feel like it couldn't be appreciated enough, but Dennis Johnson's Tree of Smoke, I just like again, and I keep finding myself picking it up and going back. It is, you know, I just think it is such a superb piece of war literature, and gets at so many angles and strangenesses and, you know, dimensions of humanity that I think most war fiction doesn't touch as much. And yeah, so that's the one I'm going to go with. But
No, I totally agree. I mean, you know, a conversation we've had multiple times, and you know, something that in our little literary corner of the world we dwell over is how do you tell a war story that's, you know, both about the war as a whole and about individuals, right? Like, because that's individuals often make compelling storytelling, and you know, you look through there's so many great pieces of literary work that came out of Vietnam, but Tree of Smoke does both of those things, the macro and the micro, simultaneously.
right.
In a way that I think even some of the other great pieces don't quite get at. So right. I think that's a good call.
Yeah.
Next question. You both served in the military. When writing fiction, does it ever get too close to what your reality was at one point? Or are you able to separate it out?
Yeah, great question. I'd be curious what you think, how you would answer this, Matt. I mean, I think I sometimes have like a pet peeve that, and it's probably not fair, but I think there's an expectation that for a lot of reasons that military fiction or war fiction written by veterans is like always thinly just like veiled by, you know, autobiography. And I actually set out like, well, obviously there's so many ways that my personal experience, for instance, in Afghanistan and in the military contributed to this book. Like, I didn't want to write my story. You know what I mean? Like, I chose someone with a different MOS, a different, I did not want to write about a medic. So maybe that's an indication of me not wanting to get too close to reality. But I don't know. What would you say, Matt?
Yeah, I think you're totally right that the public perception is that vet fiction is always going to be, auto fiction or something close to it. And, there's been some very successful examples of that. My own journey, I think I was saved from that because my first book was nonfiction. So I wrote all about what my scout platoon did. And I got it out of my system. And it's a book I'm very proud of. I don't think I hope it's not the best thing I ever write. But after that, it was when I was transitioning to fiction. So I was almost kind of cleansed of any normal instinct to get my story out. I'd already done it, and been lucky to do so as a really more, as a person more than anything, just kind of getting it out of me. So yeah, then I was able to grow as a writer, and when I made the decision that I wanted to be a professional writer and thought of myself accordingly, all that stuff was already gone. So I, like with most things in my life, I just kind of stumbled into the right thing or something, into something that worked out. It wasn't part of some kind of great plan.
Right.
The Irish gods were just looking out for me somewhere.
Yeah, I was gonna say though, that's a smart way to do it. Maybe Mets should always get get a memoir out.
Yeah, maybe I should figure out a way to pitch that as some kind of some kind of Navy SEAL hustle plan or something. Go to Wall Street and become a consultant. I'll be making a lot more money than I do as a freelancer. That's for sure. I'm just joking. I won't ever do that. I'm not that cynical. Last question. What's your next book, and will it possibly include any of the same characters that we have here in Fire in the Blood?
Great question. Yeah, I mean, next book is still, very much in development. There's lots of possibilities, and I definitely I'm superstitious about not talking about things until they're more on the page. But I think I can confidently say it will probably not involve. I mean, it has occurred to me at times that it would be like I love other writers that sort of almost stealthily build out worlds, not in the way that the novels are connected. And maybe it's just a really convenient thing to do if you've already spent a lot of time with the character, to just kind of include the same side character, but I don't have any plans right now to include any of the cast of Fire in the Blood in the next, in whatever the next book will be. That's
what you say now. In 50 years, it'll be like Faulkner's, what's the county in Mississippi that he created? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that world building, you know what I mean? And I'm always satisfied when it's always when you notice it, when it's not sort of, part of the obvious project of the writer to sort of, to do that. But then you're like, wait a minute, that name's familiar. That's always satisfying.
Yeah. But to your point, I think it's important that it needs to feel organic, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's it. Perry, really enjoyed seeing you, man, and talking with you about your excellent book. Everyone, if you haven't already, order Fire in the Blood. It's well worth your time.
Thanks so much for this. This is really fun.
Enjoyed it.